Hey, this is part 2 of Letter to Milena by Franz Kafka. Last time we ended up on the third letter. Today we're going to start with the fourth one. As always, I'm reading 3 chapters, 3 letters, and at the end I will share some of my thoughts. With that being said, Miran, April 1920. So it's the lung. I've been turning it over in my mind all day long, unable to think of anything else. Not that it alarms me. Probably and hopefully you seem to indicate as much. You have a mild case and even full-fledged pulmonary disease. Open parenthesis. Half of Western Europe has more or less deficient lung. Close parenthesis. As I have known in myself for 3 years, has brought me more good things than bad. In my case, it began about 3 years ago, with a violent hemorrhage in the middle of the night. I was excited, as one always is by something new. Naturally, somewhat frightened as well. I got up, open parenthesis, instead of staying in bed, which is prescribed treatment as I later discovered, close parenthesis, went to the window, leaned out, went to the washstand, walked around the room, sat down on the bed, no end to the blood. But I wasn't at all unhappy, since by and by I realized that for the first time in 4 practically sleepless years, there was a clear reason for me to sleep, provided the bleeding would stop. It did indeed stop, open parenthesis, and has not returned since, close parenthesis. And as I slept through the rest of the night, to be sure the next morning the maid showed up, open parenthesis. At that time I had an apartment in the Sherborne Palais, close parenthesis. I'm sorry, I wasn't really sure how to pronounce the name of the apartment, so I had to pause, sorry. Anyways, close parenthesis. A good, totally devoted but extremely frank girl. She saw the blood and said, "Pane dontore. You're not going to be. Oh my God, I am so sorry. It says, you're not going to last very long. But I was feeling better than usual. I went to the office and did not go to see the doctor until later that afternoon. The rest of the story is immaterial. I only wanted to say, it's not your illness which scares me. Open parenthesis, especially since I keep interrupting myself to search my memory, and underneath all your fragility, I perceive something like a farm girl's vigor, and I conclude, no, you're not sick. This is a warning, but not disease of the lung. Close parenthesis. Anyway, it's not that which scares me, but the thought of what must have preceded this disturbance, For the moment, I'm simply ignoring everything else in your letters, such as not a heller, tea, not a heller, tea, and apple, daily from 2 to 8. These are things I cannot understand, which evidently require oral explanation. So I'll ignore all that. Open parenthesis. Though only in this letter, as I cannot forget them. Close parenthesis. And just recall the explanation I applied to my own case back then, and which fits many cases. You see, my brain was no longer able to bear the pain and anxiety with which it had been burdened. It said, I'm giving up. But if anyone else here cares about keeping the whole intact, then he should share the load and things will run a little longer. Whereupon Malang volunteered. He probably didn't have much to lose anyways. These negotiations between Lang and Brain, which went on without my knowledge, may well have been quite terrifying. And what are you going to do now? The fact that you're being looked after is probably insignificant. Anyone who cares about you has to realize that you need a little looking after. Nothing else really matters. So is there salvation here as well? I said already, no, I'm not in the mood for making jokes. I'm not being funny in the least, and will not be funny again until I have written how you are planning a new and healthier way of life. After your last letter, I'm not going to ask why you don't leave Vienna for a while. Now I understand. But after all, there are beautiful places close to Vienna as well, which offer many different cares and possibilities of care. Today I'm going to write about anything else. I don't have anything more important to bring up. I'm saving everything else for tomorrow, including my thank for the issue of Ken. I'm sorry, there's a word I'm not familiar with. It's spelled K-M-E-N. I don't know what it stands for, or I don't know how to pronounce it, so I'm sorry. Anyways, I'm saving everything else for tomorrow, including my thanks for the issue of Ken, which makes me moved and ashamed, happy and sad. No, there is one other thing. If you waste as much as 1 minute of your sleep on the translation, it would be as if you were cursing me. For if it ever comes to trial, there will be no further investigations. They will simply establish the fact he robbed her in her sleep. With that I shall be condemned, and justly. Thus I'm fighting for myself when I ask you to stop. Franz Kafka. Okay, so I realized that I'm gonna have to stop reading what's in between the parentheses. That's what because I realized that as I was reading the previous letter, I realized that it's kind of confusing because you kind of need context, because in the introduction you will be able to get what he means by what's in the parentheses, but I'm going to stop reading that and just stick to the letter. With that being said, letter 2. Miran, end of April 1920. Dear from Milena, today I would like to write about something else but can't. Not that this really bothers me. If it did, then I would write something else. But now and then, a deck chair really should be ready for you somewhere in the garden, half in the shade, with about 10 glasses of milk within easy reach. It might even be in Vienna, even now in the summer, but without hunger and in peace. Is this impossible? And is there no one to make it possible? And what does the doctor say? When I pulled your translation out of the large envelope, I was almost disappointed. I wanted to hear from you another voice from the old grave. The voice I know all too well. Why did it have to come between us? Then I realized that this same voice had also come between us as a mediator. But apart from that, it is inconceivable. Oh my God. It is inconceivable to me that you will take on such a troublesome task. And I am moved by your faithfulness towards every little sentence. A faithfulness I would not have thought possible to achieve in Czech, let alone with the beautiful natural authority you retain. German and Czech, so close to each other, but however that may be, the story is in any case abysmally bad, which I could prove to you, dear from Milena, with unparalleled ease, except that my disgust would outweigh the evidence. Naturally, the further you like the story gives it some value, although it also makes my view of the world a little dimmer. The more about that. Wolf, who sent you the country doctor, I have written to him. Of course I understand Czech. I've meant to ask you several times already why you never write in Czech. Not to imply that your command of German leaves anything to desire. Most of the time it is amazing, and on those occasions when it does falter, the German language becomes pliant just for you, of its own accord, and then it is particularly beautiful, something a German doesn't even dare hope for. A German wouldn't dare write so personally, but I wanted to read you in Czech because, after all, you do belong to that language, because only there can Milena be found in her entirety, whereas here there's only the Milena from Vienna, or the Milena preparing for Vienna. So Czech, please. And also the feuilleton you mentioned, even if they are shabby, after all you managed to read through the shabbiness of my story. How far, I don't know. Maybe I can do the same. However, if I can make it through the end, at least I'll stick in the best possible prejudice. You ask about my engagement. I was engaged twice, or actually 3 times, twice to the same girl, or 3. I've been separated from marriage by only a few days. The first is completely over, the second is still alive, although without any prospect of marriage. So it really isn't alive, or rather, it's living an independent life at the cost of the people involved. On the whole, I have found here and elsewhere that men may suffer more, or if you prefer, they have less resistance in these matters. Women, however, always suffer without guilt, and not just because they can't do anything about it, but in the strictest sense of the word, which may nonetheless lead to the can't do anything about it. Incidentally, brooding over these things is useless. It's like trying to smash a single cauldron in hell. First, the enterprise won't succeed, and second, if it does succeed, one will be consumed by the glowing effluent, while hell remains intact in all of its glory. The first problem must be approached differently. In any case, the first thing is to lie down in a garden and extract as much sweetness as possible, especially if it's not a genuine disease. There's a lot of sweetness in that. Franz Kafka. That was the end of letter 2, and I believe you do need context because in this book, the time period is, think Nazi, Hitler, Germany being at war with like almost the entirety of the world. Think about that. So in letter 2, when he mentioned about how he was hoping for her to write in Czech, he was talking about that. Anyways, that was letter 2. Let's get to letter 3. Meran, April to May 1920. Dear Frau Milena, to begin with, so that you don't deduce it from my letters against my will, for about 14 days now, I have had increasing insomnia. I generally don't take it badly. Times like this come and go. They also always have a few more explanations than they really need. And even if they frequently are just barely visible, all these causes can still make one as dull as a block of wood, and at the same time as restless as a beast of the forest. However, I do have one compensation. You have slept peacefully, even if somewhat oddly. Even if yesterday you were still out of the sorts, nonetheless, your sleep was peaceful. So when sleep passes over me in the night, I know where it is headed and accept this. Of course, it would be stupid to resist. Sleep is the most innocent creature there is, and a sleepless man, the most guilty. And you thank the sleepless man in your letter. If an unitated okay, this is the first time, and I am so serious, this is the first time this is the first time I've come across this word. If an uninitiated stranger, never mind, I came across this word before, I just didn't know. If an uninitiated stranger were to read it, he'd have to think, what a man! He must have moved mountains here. But meanwhile, he hasn't done a thing, hasn't lifted a finger, except to write. He's living off milk and good things without always, although often, saying tea and apples. Reference to Little One. I mean, yeah. And in general, he lets things take course and leaves the mountain alone. Do you know the story of it's the name of the author of another series that I'll be covering later on. I'm gonna try to do him justice here, alright? Dostoevsky. Oh, I'm gonna write it down. First, do you know the story of Dostoevsky's first success? It encompasses a great many things. What's more, I cite it only because the great name makes it easy to do so. For a story from next door or even closer will have the same significance. Incidentally, many memories of my story, and even the names is inexact. When Dost wrote his first novel, Poor Folks, he was living with his friend Grigoriev, a man of letters. The latter watched for months as the written pages accumulated on the desk, but didn't receive the manuscript until it was finished. He read the novel, was delighted, and took it to Nekrasov, a famous contemporary critic. I cannot read for some reason. I don't know why, I just can't read. I need to increase my vocabulary. Anyways, he read a novel, was delighted, and took it to Nekrasov, a famous contemporary critic, without thinking anything to D. That night at 3 o'clock, the doorbell rings at D's. It's GRNN. Okay. GR is for Grigoriev, the man or the person I mentioned earlier, and N is for Nekrasov. I'm having a really hard time pronouncing these words. But anyways, that night at 3 o'clock, the doorbell rings at D's. It's GR and N. They pushed their way into the room, embraced and kissed D. Nekrasov, who hadn't known him before, calls him the hope of Russia. They spent 1 or 2 hours talking mostly about the novel and don't leave until morning. D, who always described this night as the happiness in his life. Oh, by the way, D stands for Dostoevsky. Yeah, the author of a very famous book. No, seriously. Chef Kiss. D, who always described this night as the happiest of his life, leans out the window to watch them leave, loses control and starts to cry. His basic feelings at that moment, which he describes, although I forgot where, were something like, "These wonderful people, They're so good and noble, and I am so mean. Yet you could only see inside me, and even if I simply tell them, they won't believe me. The fact that they later undertook to emulate them is merely embellishment, merely the last word that youth demand in its invincibility, and is no longer part of my story, which consequently ends here. Do you, dear From Milena, see the mystery in this story? Do you see what reason cannot grasp? I think it is this. As far as we generalize, GR and N were certainly no nobler than dust. But now leave the general overview aside, which even D didn't demand that night, and which is useless in specific cases. Concentrate solely on dust, and you'll be convinced that GR and N really were wonderful. That D was impure, infinitely mean, that he will never even come close to catching up to GR and N, let alone repay them for their monstrously kind, undeserved good deed. You can actually see them from the window as they walk away, thereby indicating their unapproachability. Unfortunately, the meaning of the story is obliterated by the great name Dostoevsky. Where did my insomnia lead me? I'm sure to nothing that was not very well meant. Franz Kafka. Ladies and gentlemen, that was letter 3 of today's. So it will be the end. With that being said, oh la la, sometimes this book is confusing. There are terms that I have never, I've never said out loud. So it's kind of odd. I'm in an odd, place. With that being said, those 3 later were pretty good. Pretty good, I have to admit. I wonder what the letters were saying. I mean, by the looks of it, right? She had already responded, but we haven't read those letters yet. Hopefully, somewhere in here, they do reveal some of those letters. With that being said, I hope you have a wonderful evening and have a good night.